We've already established that Charlene and I are firmly sitting in Cape Town in the cold. Candace is sitting in Durban in summer, and Dorothy is sitting in Nairobi in summer. Julian is probably, he seems to be in autumn somewhere.
Oh, hot and sweaty in Barcelona.
Nice, 90 some. So I was at University of Cape Town.
19 degrees in the Netherlands. Is that summer or spring or?
Summer.
Dutch summer, yeah.
Hot in Hanoi.
Oh, that sounds like a book title.
Okay. We seem to be about 70 people in the room. I think, I mean, it's a little less than yesterday, but I want to respect everybody's time and not, have us start too late to be able to also just get through all of the items that we have on today's program. So if everybody is okay for me to go ahead and start with the webinar while we still have a few people joining us. Is that okay? Okay, great. Welcome everyone to the second installment of our YouGood capacity strengthening webinars. I'm not sure if all of you were present in yesterday's webinar, but if not, welcome to our second day, and then also welcome to those that joined us yesterday. And thank you for joining us again today. The focus of today, my name is Angelique Voltskit. I am one of the leads in the YouGood program, supported by our academic lead, Professor Charlene Swartz, one of our other thematic leads, Candace Groenewald. Krish Chetty is also in the room. And I think our other thematic lead, Cindy Lee McBride, might also be here. I can't see all of the faces. I have to scroll through too many screens. So that is the constitution of the HSRC team. And then we also have our NRF team with us in the room. And when they will be speaking, I'm sure they can also introduce themselves. I will be facilitating today's program. Yesterday, we were led by Charlene. But today you'll have to deal with me, and I'll just take you through a brief overview of what we are planning for the day and how the time slots will be dealt with. So today's focus, whereas yesterday's focus was very much around a deep dive into relational well-being as an approach and helping you understand the difference between relational well-being as an approach and the applied form that we are taking in YouGood, today is focusing on theory testing in the social sciences. And the reason why this is one of the important topics of our capacity strengthening webinars is that one of the objectives of this program is to test relational well-being as an approach. And that might elicit the question around how does one actually do that? We know that there are positivist orientations. We know that quantitative orientations might make this notion of theory testing very easily understood in that context. But when we're dealing maybe with more qualitative paradigms, what does that mean? And we thought that this is an important aspect that we as a team need to engage with and build capacity around. So that is the focus of today. Just to give you a bit of an overview of how the day is structured, we will have our first input immediately after me. Our first input will be from Dr. Julian Eckel, who's joining us. He's at the University of St. Gallen. He will be presenting on the perspectives on theory testing, and I'll allow Julian to give us a little bit more feedback when he gives his presentation. Then there will be a 15-minute slot after that to raise questions for clarity. And if we can, in that slot, try to focus on the questions of clarity that arises from Julian's input, so that we make sure that we deal with all of the aspects that relates to his presentation. Then we will have Dr. Candace Groenewald that will give us the next input, which is around relational evaluation within UGood. And similarly, that will be followed by another 15-minute slot where, again, you'll have an opportunity to raise questions for clarity that pertains to her input. Similar to yesterday's structure, we will then break away into groups and allow us to engage on two key questions again that deals with the content that had been shared. And then we'll come back into a facilitated discussion and closure around the learnings that we've had through today's session, but also some of the challenges that might still remain even after all of this input had been shared. So that gives you a sense of the overall structure of the program and who's going to be on the program today. Tomorrow, we will be dealing with approaches to foster meaningful collaboration with young people. And when it's tomorrow's program, we will take you through the detailed program. But just to signal that that is tomorrow's focus. Okay. That being said, I think that provides enough of an overview of the program. And then I would like to actually get us into it. It's almost 1:15 already. So I want to welcome Dr. Julian Eckel and ask him to provide his first input. Let me just give a brief bio about who Julian is. Julian is a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of St. Gallen. He was trained as a political scientist, but draws on various neighboring disciplines in his work. For more than a decade, he has conducted ethnographic and other qualitative research on various aspects of global health and governance. And he has also served in different advisory roles, including work with the World Health Organization and foundation partner, and thus our engagement with him today. Among the issues he teaches are global health governance and research methods, and so we are very happy to have him give us an input and share his ideas with us today. Thank you so much, Julian.
Thank you so much, Angelique, for the kind introduction. I'm gonna share my slides. Let me have a look. Angelique, can you see my slides and only my slides? No disturbing Word documents or anything else in the way? That's great.
Yes.
So let me just jot down the time so that I'm gonna do some good timing as well. So it's my real pleasure to talk to you today about perspectives on theory testing. And in this introduction, which is this next slide, I just wanted to clarify a few things that might be helpful for what comes afterwards. So first, what I think is important to keep in mind is that in the context of research on health and well-being, there are, on the one hand, promises, and on the other hand, challenges that follow from interdisciplinarity and different research traditions. What I mean by this is that on this call today, but also in the broader space of the research on well-being, there are people with various disciplinary backgrounds, people from different geographies, and we all have our specific usage of words and concepts, and there are certain things that we take for granted and others that we find a bit puzzling. So I think one of the purposes for today is simply to establish a minimum common understanding of some terms. And I would encourage you to not, focus too much on a tiny point I make or a specific word I use, because we can actually anticipate that there will be a broad range of vocabulary that we use, but rather to focus on, let's say, some of the key takeaways or the broader messages I try to convey. And then theory testing, from my perspective, implies prioritizing theories and theoretical questions. Potentially, it also implies that you want to contribute to a scholarly theory-focused debate. What do I mean by this? By this, I mean that obviously in your applications and in your projects more broadly, you want to achieve various goals, and theory testing is one of them. What I focus on here doesn't mean, that your project should be only about this, but what I try to clarify is exactly that aspect of your project, the theory testing aspect, which means that today, or in that segment, we prioritize all things theoretical, if you like. So this input draws on qualitative case studies research in the social sciences, with which I'm most familiar, but the central points, I would argue, are of a more general relevance, and I'll try to discuss them in that way. So the key messages of this input, I think, are two ideal typical ways of testing theories can be distinguished, and I will elaborate on them in a moment. And these are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but emphasize different things. And you know best which way fits with your proposal. I'm not going to, prescribe anything. And you can be creative in terms of what you want to test and how you want to go about. However, and I guess this is really the most important aspect, you should explicitly state what you want to do. So you could say the purpose of my input is to help you to reflect on your own goals and what you do want to achieve with your project, and then to formulate those goals in a way that are more or less easily accessible for other people, for the people who read your applications, obviously in particular. So let's take a look at those two ideal types I mentioned earlier. We could say that theory testing can be concerned with either correctness. Some people also talk about relative strength in that context of a theory, or they could be concerned with the usefulness of a theory. What do I mean by this? So correctness-focused testing uses the natural sciences for inspiration, although it acknowledges that this type of research cannot be fully transferred to human relations. Angelique earlier also mentioned the term positivist types of research in that context earlier. And correctness-focused testing truly tries to test theory-derived expectations and their observable implications against empirical observations. This whole way of thinking about theory testing is sometimes conveyed by the notion of, rigorous research or rigorous theory testing that people sometimes talk about in this context. So let's look at usefulness-focused testing in contrast. It foregrounds that theories are not just disciplining our thinking, but also a source of inspiration. Thus, it points at the explorative function of theories and tests different ways in which theories can be useful for different groups of people, and we will see in a moment who these groups of people can be. Let's look at each of these two types of theory testing in a bit more detail. So let's start off with what people sometimes call correctness. So is there congruence between expectations and observations is really the key question, I would say, that people who work in this tradition would address. So-called congruence analysis is the typical research design for testing the correctness or strength of theories. While it can in principle contribute to the development of novel theories, it is commonly used to test and or refine existing theories. And obviously, this makes it well suited for the engagement with relational well-being, as well. As we heard earlier from Charlene, it's a key concern of the UGood project to test relational well-being as a theory or as an approach. So congruence analysis has its name, and I think that's an important clarification, from the crucial step of the analysis, which is the following. Researchers test whether the observable implications of the theory-derived expectations are congruent with the empirical observations. That might sound a bit technical, but I think it's a very precise way to talk about this. There might be other terms that you're more familiar with. So some of you might be more familiar with a slightly different vocabulary and talk about the testing of, say, hypotheses, predictions, or propositions. For the present purpose, we will subsume all of the cases where relational well-being would serve as the starting point for deductive reasoning under the notion of congruence analysis. So the broader approach is, testing theories for their correctness, and the way in which this is conventionally done is so-called congruence analysis. You might not have come across the term, but I think it's a very useful term, and it has its name from this crucial step of testing the congruence of your expectations with your empirical observations, and all these other terms that you might be familiar with, such as hypothesis testing, would also apply in this context. Now, in principle, congruence analysis is really straightforward. In practice, however, it's often quite challenging. And practical challenges that you might face include the following ones. First of all, mixed evidence. So mixed evidence can be one of two things. It can mean that there's only partial congruence between what you expected and what you observed. So that you could say it's not fully false or wrong, but it's also not completely correct either. Related, but slightly different, and the second point would be that you test various expectations and that some of them are congruent with your observations and others are not. So this is the challenge of mixed evidence. And then there's the problem that there's a broad range of potential sources for the lack of congruence. So it might be the theory that has some flaws, but it could also be that you had some flaws in your research design or the way you set it up or in your measurements or what have you. And against this background, there are some suggestions with a view to how you can secure the quality of your congruence analysis. And let me talk a bit about these strategies. First of all, people suggest that it might be useful to do comparative theory testing. And the theory that you use for this purpose could either be a competing theory or a complementary one. And you would then focus on the relative strength of each of the theories. How does that change the problems of, for example, mixed evidence? So the thing is, you wouldn't need to come to the conclusion that the theory you are testing is fully correct or that all of the expectations you had were met. But you would talk about this in more relative terms. You would say, I have a theory A and a theory B, and the theory A was at least able to explain a broad range of phenomena, or a broad range of the expectations were met, even though not all. However, theory B is faring even worse. And this is what I mean when I say you would talk about it in relative terms. And secondly, a second theory would also potentially help you to reflect on maybe things like measurement or the general setup of your study. Then, also relating to the general strategies, it's really important that you formulate unique or discriminatory expectations. By this, I mean that you have to, sorry, I hear some discussions in the background. Okay, thanks. Formulating unique or discriminatory expectations. So in particular, when you test more than one theory, you have to ask yourself, what is specific about, say, relational well-being? What is a prediction that's unique to it that would help me to discriminate which of the two theories is more correct? So for example, there would be various theories that would predict that increasing the material well-being of people would increase overall well-being. So if you want to test competing theories, it might be more helpful to look at aspects where they would disagree on, interventions or steps to be taken, where each of the theories would make competing or divergent expectations. And then thirdly, in this context, you should really spell out what you should not observe, as opposed to focusing only on supportive evidence. So when you want to test relational well-being, ask yourself, what should really not happen? What would be really puzzling from that perspective? So for example, if people are, say, connected, and if they have enough, shouldn't you also expect to some degree that they also report overall well-being? I mean, I'm just making this example from the top of my head. I'm not saying this is the best way to think about this, but just to illustrate for you what I mean by it. Ask yourself a bit, what should not happen? What would be really counterintuitive from that perspective? So you should have, in a way, positive expectation, where you would say, if these are met, that's really a strong confirmation for the theory, but also those where you would say, if I can observe them, that would be a bit of a puzzle or a problem for the theory. So illustrative suggestions for your applications. First, consider comparative theory testing. Second, derive expectations and observable implications from relational well-being. And then ask yourselves what should not be observed. And then selecting and framing cases incongruence analysis. I included this slide because case selection is often discussed extensively in the literature. And in a way, you could say many of you have probably already fixed your field sites, maybe also the people to work with. And all of this obviously contributes to the way in which you carve out your case. So you could at least think about the question of how that case makes sense from a theory testing perspective. So textbooks demand that cases for congruence analysis are selected according to theoretical relevance, and such crucial cases are often divided into most and least likely cases. A typical example for a crucial case would be a case that seems to be difficult to explain with the theory that we're interested in, and if the theory is nevertheless able to do so, this is strong evidence for the explanatory strength of the theory. This is a so-called least likely case design. In practice, the textbook approach is often undermined by the fact that case selection can be influenced by various additional factors, including field access. However, what you should probably be able to discuss explicitly in your application are two sets of questions. First, what aspects of relational well-being can presumably be studied and thus tested in your case? And then second, what does your case look like from a theoretical perspective? To what degree and in what sense is your case crucial for testing relational well-being? Do you anticipate that the phenomena you want to study are straightforward or puzzling from this perspective of relational well-being, or if you include several theories, from the perspective of alternative approaches? So really what I'm saying here is ask yourselves a bit about what makes the things you're interested in, the things that you want to study, relevant from the perspective of theory testing. And then a final slide on the correctness focused testing of theories. And I talk here in particular about observable implications because they are so important for this way of doing theory testing. You can either derive a few observable implications from each theory that you want to compare. This is often called external control. Or you can derive a rather broad range of observable implications from relational well-being only, and this is called internal control. In any event, you need a range of observable implications and not just, say, one or two. And the more relational well-being derived observable implications are included and prove to be congruent with the empirical observations, the more confident you can be in your overall findings. But you don't need such a broad range of observable implications if you want to test several theories, because you will have to do it for each of the theories to test the same phenomenon, if you like, and to do this comparative analysis, which of them fared better. Observable implications can be based on so-called variable-related or on process-related expectations. So you could be thinking about measuring variables, or you could be thinking of, observing processes. For example, one might focus on the factors in the sense of conditions or variables that influence well-being, or one might focus on the exact process through which people can achieve well-being. Now, these two ways of thinking about expectations are complementary, of course, but in practical research, there tends to be a focus on either of the two, since each of them foregrounds different kinds of observations and requires different data collection techniques. So obviously, in a more qualitative setting, you would also be able to look at the processes and mechanisms. In quantitative research, there's often more of a focus on observing and measuring variables. Right, I've reached half time, and that's good to move on to testing usefulness. And here the question is a theory useful for researchers, research participants, and or young people? And you see already from this key question that potentially the realm for the people whose perspectives are relevant in terms of that theory is much broader, and it includes research participants and or young people. I said and or because not all research participants will necessarily be young people, I suppose. So correctness-focused theory testing, the one we spoke about before, but I use it just to contrast it with usefulness-tested one. So correctness-focused theory testing needs clearly delineated and rigid concepts. Borrowing from Herbert Blumer, we could say that it relies on definitive concepts, with the consequence that theory can be applied decisively to the empirical world and tested effectively in research inquiry. We've spoken about this before. Now, this focus on definitive concepts can be contrasted with reliance on what Blumer calls sensitizing concepts. And I quote now, whereas definitive concepts provide prescriptions of what to see, sensitizing concepts merely suggest directions along which to look. Moreover, sensitizing concepts are particularly apt for studying everyday experience, and they acknowledge the distinctive, particular, or unique character of each object of study. I said object of study here because that's a general statement, but you could in your cases also talk about your research setting and the people you want to work with, obviously. In other words, while correctness-focused theory testing subsumes empirical phenomena under preconceived definitive concepts, usefulness-focused theory testing uses sensitizing concepts for rough guidance and follows a more open research design. So that's also important. We're talking about open research designs that stay alert to unexpected insights. Typical examples of such open research designs would be grounded theory or ethnography. So you don't want to constrain yourself by these definite concepts and, preconceived expectations or hypotheses, but you take a more inductive approach, a more serendipitous approach, and you look what you discover in the fields and by working with the people that you want to integrate into your project. So being useful by providing broad guidance and enabling communication, I would say, are two key points here. At the outset, however, I want to clarify something. To be sure, also when the focus is on usefulness, expectations can obviously be tested against empirical observations, but theories will additionally be used in a less structured and more serendipitous way. To this end, theories serve as a source of inspiration and as a pool of sensitizing concepts. Moreover, theories help researchers to formulate intriguing questions, and the value of a theory is to provide a broad framework for an explorative research process rather than a fixed template into which the findings have to be fitted. And in addition to this internal purpose, I'm saying internal because this is really the internal concerns of the researchers regarding a research process. Theories and the concepts contained therein can serve an important communicative function. In other words, theories provide a rough framework or a common language, but but not a definitive basis. This implies also that if researchers start to use a theory's concepts too loosely, they run the risk of talking past each other. The challenge is to use theories and concepts in this sensitizing manner without losing the common ground or without undermining the common language. So what I mean by this is that you could find in your research project that relational well-being provides a vocabulary that allows you within the project, but also when you reach out to other people, to talk about well-being in a very useful manner, without you kind of testing in this other sense that we spoke about before, if all of the predictions of the theory are congruent with your observations, but you see that it adds a value in this very practical manner. And let me give you some examples for assessing usefulness in practice, and here with a view to relational well-being in particular. So at the outset, it's important to keep in mind that also the usefulness of a theory can be tested best in comparison to other theories. So that's just for clarification. You could say maybe there are other theories whose vocabulary would be even better, even more helpful. However, in your projects, relational well-being can demonstrate its usefulness if it helps to see things that you would otherwise have overlooked. For example, unexpected ways in which people can improve their well-being. Similarly, relational well-being can demonstrate its usefulness if it helps to develop novel interventions. A more general point to consider is the ability of relational well-being to provide a common framework that makes visible the specific ways in which people experience and nurture well-being in different contexts. Relatedly, relational well-being could prove useful by providing a common language, not only for researchers, but also for research participants, as well as other young people. And let me elaborate a bit on this. So relational well-being could also prove useful if it provides the research participants, as well as other young people, with a conceptual language that helps them to reflect upon their own situation in a novel manner and to develop their own strategies to improve their well-being on this basis. So in particular, if you're coming from a more action-oriented strand of research, if you have a more emancipatory concern, I think relational well-being could prove its usefulness if by, let's say, teaching people in its basic concepts and understandings, you enable them to take care of their own lives. That, I think, would be a very strong case in favor of relational well-being, and that would be quite distinct from the correctness-focused theory testing we spoke about earlier. So selecting and framing cases when focusing on usefulness, and here also you will see a striking difference. Open research designs value cases that allow for exploration and promise to be empirically rich. In your application, you could foreground what is unique about your case and demonstrate that you have good access to the people, or you might want to prefer to talk about the field that you want to work with. As in the case of correctness-focused testing, you could also point out what aspects of relational well-being can presumably be studied in your case, or you could also put that the other way around and say what elements of relational well-being would be particularly relevant for your case. Thus, what phenomena of interest will be particularly clearly visible? That's a key question, I think. Finally, you may want to elaborate on the question of whether you anticipate that relational well-being can be directly applied to your case, or if relational well-being will be used as a framework or platform on the basis of which you will have to do some context-specific and empirically grounded theorizing. For example, are you going to study a very specific local understanding of well-being? And it could be that you take relational well-being just as a platform for, let's say, common thinking, and as a platform to communicate your findings to other researchers and to talk with the research participants. But on top of that, you'll be doing some theorizing that tries to get at the specifics of the local understanding of well-being that you are interested in. Also here you can see how that differs from this other way of thinking about concepts in the correctness focused approach to testing, where you want to have strict and universally applicable concepts. So some concluding considerations regarding usefulness before I sum up my input overall. So in spite of the openness that is valued by the second way of theory testing, there are 2 points that should be kept in mind, I think. First, there's the issue of whether relational well-being provides enough guidance. Guidance is needed in various areas, including both the question of what to focus on eventually and the problem of how to avoid conceptual overstretch and the loss of a common language. So while a usefulness-focused approach to theory testing values this kind of, explorative stance and open research designs, it's really important to keep in mind that relational well-being nevertheless has to provide you with some guidance to be useful. If everything is relevant, if you come to the conclusion that from the perspective of relational well-being, there's nothing that's not relevant for well-being, it's not a theory in the strict sense of the term, because a theory should help us to see key things to focus on, phenomena that are relevant for what interests us. And by the same token, if relational well-being leads to conceptual overstretch, and at a workshop on relational well-being, the term has 35 meanings and nobody knows what the other people are talking about, then it's not useful either. It has to balance these 2 concerns, really. That's the first point on this slide. The second point, in line with the points discussed in the context of congruence analysis, it is still important to consider what empirical observations would clearly contradict relational well-being. As mentioned before, it is pertinent to also search for this kind of evidence. So, for example, if relational well-being suggests that a broad range of factors is relevant, and that these factors are interconnected, and then you have a competing theory that says if we change only this one factor, and the well-being of people will improve drastically, and then you show in your project that you change just this very one factor, and you have a huge difference, that's a bit of a challenge, I would argue, for relational well-being that emphasizes the connectedness of things. Let me conclude. The preceding discussion made an ideal typical distinction between testing theories for correctness, you could also say for strength, on the one hand, and usefulness on the other hand. Each way has its merits, and I think that's really important to keep in mind. I'm not making the case or saying, that you should follow either of the 2. Moreover, there are various points on which they would agree. In particular, both see value in testing theories vis-à-vis each other. Both would also encourage researchers to carefully consider the question of what observations are not compatible with relational well-being. Finally, an actual research project can certainly take inspiration from both ways, but even such an eclectic approach will benefit from the preceding clarification of the specific logics of each of the 2 ways. So what's then the key takeaway for you from my talk, I think, or I hope? The key takeaway for you is that you should explicate in your application what exactly you want to do in terms of theory testing. I tried to show to you that there's a broad range of possibilities, but what you should really do is to clarify what exactly you're up to, and then your readers can judge you on that project or on that goal. Thanks a lot for listening, and I really look forward to your questions, and I hope that this talk was helpful for you and will prove helpful for your applications. I can't hear anything, but maybe nobody is talking either. I'm not quite sure.
Thank you so much, Julian. I think that was really fantastic to bring us all into the room and to focus us and for the researchers to focus them on how they could think about theory testing in a very applied way for their work. I really appreciated the way that you kind of compared these 2 perspectives without expectation placed on the researchers, but giving us a direction on how to go. I know your work has really inspired the way that we're thinking about evaluation, even in New Good. So thank you very much for that. I think that Angelique has dropped off a little bit. And I'm hoping that she would be joining us soon. But in absence of her for now, I want to just open up the room, or open up for some discussions from our colleagues in the room. Any questions, comments that you have on what was presented today? Points of clarity. I see some, we see some faces today. Videos going on, hands going up. So that's
I just
awesome.
wanted to state, since I saw that in the chat, I can share the slides, no problem. Candice has them already,
Awesome.
I think.
Yes, no, great. Yes. So just for everybody from the get-go, even the slides we'll share later, we are going to share the slides. So you don't have to worry about that. So I see one hand from Vera. Just want to see if there's any other hands. Vera, please go ahead. Thanks and you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Julian. I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you. So my question has to do with context and situationality within understanding relationships. From an ethics of care perspective, we realize that situatedness and relationality is very important. What is your take on developing transferable knowledge? Obviously, in terms of the knowledge that you developed is within a particular context. But my question is, would it be very useful if it's only limited to that specific context? And what is your take then on developing transferable knowledge so that it could also be then applicable in another context?
Candice, should I collect questions or should we respond immediately? For me, both is fine.
I think you can respond because I don't see anything in the chat or any other hands going up. So yeah, please go ahead.
Vera, thanks a lot for your question. And I guess, how should I say, I could think of this as almost like steps or stairs in a way. And you could say, if in the specific context in which you did research, you produce knowledge that's useful in also that specific context, that's a first very valuable step. And then, however, you could, move out of that context in a stepwise approach. And then, however, you will also maybe lose something in a way, but that's necessary to make it transferable. And that's maybe one of the ways in which relational well-being could be useful, because it gives us some guidance how to go up these stairs or to move away from the specific context. So I could imagine that it's really difficult if you have a very fine-grained contextual understanding of well-being in one context, and then you want to move somewhere completely different and then share all of the details and all of the nuances that you figured out in this other context, because it will be hard for others to appreciate. But if you can maybe, even though you lose a bit of the details, carve out some transferable findings, that will be excellent. So in a way, I guess my answer to your question, if I understood your answer correctly, is that you have to target it in a way to the specific audiences. But to repeat, if relational well-being helps you to think about this, how to make it transferable and how to have it in different contexts, I would say it has already proven its use if it helps you to reflect on that. What does material well-being mean in that context, and what does it mean in another context?
And Julian, maybe I can just add something here. One of the reasons why we've restricted this program of research to the Global South is because we think we will have a lot more opportunity for our findings from our research studies to be transferable, given the broad ways in which the Global South is similar. And so we're not making comparison with the Global North. And so I'm hoping, and I'm hopeful that that will really help us have findings that are more transferable than if this was a more global research program.
Yes.
Can something Ali's hand? And
Yes, actually,
I just close maybe from my aspect as a user from Fondation Bodnar side, who was really wanted this program, and since we are in the same countries where the and hopefully a very close context to the one you are going to work, I think actually, even if it's quite contextualized, it will help us even to make sure that we do not in our program put some approach to well-being from one context to the other. So it could, for us, it would be useful. Of course, if it's a context which is just one community in one place within one country at one, that will be difficult maybe, but at least it will even show us what we have to pay attention to. So from, let's say, us and recommending from your experience on our programs, this is okay if we are actually, we flag the context importance and what we should not do wrong. We try to do our program. So
and I think on that point, Aline, one of the key things for us is to learn or one of the key things in this program is to learn about how that transferable knowledge could be created in the setting, learning from all the engagements that we have. So thanks so much for that. All right, we've got a few more hands. That's great. Irene, and then we'll go on to Wisnu and then Sepan. Thanks, Irene.
Hi. Yes, thank you so much. It was very interesting. We are working also in a proposal as many here, I imagine. I have a question that it's very related to the proposal writing and a structure as we have it, where there is a lot that you said on theory testing and how to think about it when we write our proposal. And my question is, as I said, very related to writing the proposal. Where in the structure do you see these to be, implemented? Is it in the problem statement, or is it in the methodology that we should be stating? How is it connected with the theory? Because as other things like youth involvement, it's very clear, it's a section, we know where we need to talk about it, and that's very clear. But for the, this theory background, it's not so clear. So I think it would be very good to have a little bit of guidance on where do you see these rationale being incorporated in the literature review, or how do you envision it? Thank you.
Sure, thanks. Charlene, you look like you want to respond.
Well, because it's quite a practical question, and you're not going to like the answer, Irene, because it needs to be in your problem statement. It needs to be in the literature review, because you're looking at what has and what hasn't been done. And then you need to say what in the methodology will help you to answer that question. So it really has to be infused. And that makes it both difficult but also open, so that you can actually make some of those decisions. And also and Julian, you can kind of come in as well, but when we talk about theory testing, are we trying to test the entire theory at once, or is it a specific aspect? And so those are the decisions that you're going to have to make, and we don't want to put you into a straitjacket. We really would like you to think it through logically, but without giving you the absolute guidance that I think that you're looking for.
Thanks, Charlene. Let me just add a quick point on this. Although Charlene and the others from the project team are much more the experts when it comes to the form, and my answer, Irene, is let's say, let me try to pretend I was a reviewer, who wasn't involved in setting up the form that you're going to fill out, and drawing on my experiences working as a reviewer, I would fully support the point that Charlene has made, namely that you have to infuse it in multiple places, because reviewers will ask themselves, since testing relational well-being is such an important overall purpose of YouGood, where can you demonstrate that you will be able to do that? And if you can do that in multiple places, that's even better, because you will remind the reviewers time and again as they go through your application that you are up to the task and that you can do it. So also from this perspective of reading application, I would fully support that. Have it in more than just one spot, without being repetitive in the sense of that you copy paste the exactly same sentence. Say it in the words that fit with the specific paragraph that you're writing.
Perfect, thank you.
Thanks. I didn't hope that helps you. We have about 5 minutes. So Vishnu, over to you. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Yeah, that's
I
correct.
haven't.
Thanks so much, and also Julian for your presentation. My remark or question is very much related to what Vera has raised before, and so I came from a background of experimental psychology, which is very much leaning towards the correctness focus approach of theory building. So and so this is a good opportunity for me to learn about the usefulness part of the theory building, which is very interesting. But my struggle with this approach is that, as Farah has mentioned, that usefulness can be very much contextual to the kind of participants, the kind of experiments, again, the kind of settings, paradigms that you want to use, and maybe that is very useful, that is very practical, it has values to your population, to the population that you're working with. But at the same time, it becomes, in my head at least, as things becomes more contextualized and practical, they're becoming less replicable, which come in tangent with the correctness part of the theory. So what is your take on this? How do I reconcile between, or make a balance, strike a balance between usefulness on the one hand and correctness on the other hand? Because at least in my head, that's they run in tangent with one another. And I hope that I'm wrong, then that we can somehow can meet in the middle on this. And the second part of the question is that you mentioned on the usefulness part about synthesizing, and I would like to hear more about that, because this is very new for me. Thanks so much.
Just a sec, how to Vishnu, thank you very much for your question. To the first part of your question, how to reconcile the two ways to think about theory testing. My key point was that they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but you don't need to reconcile them in your proposal. It's not that each proposal has to address both. My thinking was rather the other way around. I wanted to say that whatever your take on this is, it's perfectly fine, but explicitly state what you are up to, because the people who read your application will wonder what exactly it is that you have planned to do. So I think something that often happens in these, major grant rounds, and when a lot of projects apply, is that you lose projects which would be great in principle, but they take too much common knowledge for granted, and they work with too many implicit assumptions. So if you can explain that you're coming more from the experimental psychology side and that you think replicability is important, I think then you have a specific way of moving forward, and that's also fine. The point is really to make that clear, what you're up to. If we had more time, we could talk about the specifics of reconciling them, which I think is in a way possible, but not necessarily that they're on a completely equal footing. But you could say each project could take a look, think a bit outside of their specific box, and take some insights from the other approach. And then let me talk briefly about the notion of sensitizing. By this I mean, there are people who, for example, want to have your definition of, say, health or well-being, and then want to measure whether the people whom they are interested in are healthy or experience well-being. And they don't work with a sensitizing concept, but with a definite concept. If, however, you use well-being as a sensitizing concept, you simply have a specific direction into which you want to look without knowing how to measure it, and you can take on board the local understanding of that concept. It simply helps you to appreciate that in one way or another, people will talk about how they feel, and they might talk about this feeling in different ways to different people, and you as a researcher start to explore this. So it's sensitizing you to the issue of well-being, but it doesn't prescribe you how to measure it. To give you a completely different example, I am a political scientist, and often political scientists use power as a sensitizing concept. You know, they can't agree on the question of what exactly power is, but they agree that sometimes there are people who can influence other people in a way that's somewhat detrimental to these other people. What that means then in a specific context is what we have to explore, and then power is used as a sensitizing concept. Others who have a definite concept of power say, this is our definition of power, this is how we measure it, full stop. You see the difference? You use it for exploration, or you use it for measurement, and you know beforehand, you know what, how to go about.
Thanks so much. That is very clear.
I hope,
Okay,
I
thanks.
hope that helped. Thanks, Julian, and thanks, Vishnu. I think there will also be later on some space and time to discuss this in a little bit more detail if there's any other questions that you have coming up as we do our breakaways later on. I want to just check with Tshepang and Okello. I see that there's another hand up. We are 1 minute over time for the session, and we are going to have a breakaway session later on. So if your question is very pertinent, can I please ask you to ask it and just keep it short? That sounds very unrelational of me. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to ensure that we have some time a little bit later on to engage, and we'll have about 30 minutes, and then again another 30 minutes to engage. So Tshepang, are you there?
Thanks, Candice. Thank you, Juliana. I'm very interested on the perspective of correctness. So I just want clarity from epistemic perspective and ontological question as to what exactly is its goals. Since I'm coming from the school of thought of social empowerment, emancipation, and mutual respect. So when conducting social research, these are the leading principles that we need to take into cognizance. So I just want to understand from correctness perspective, there is a congruency between expectation and observation. So what exactly does it say about epistemic goals and ontological question?
Okay. Thanks for that, Julian. I'm going to give you this whole next session to think about it.
Okay, so I'll respond later.
When we come back into our session, I think you can maybe respond to that, because it does feel like it is a heavy question a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to just give you a moment to ask your question, and we'll do the same for you, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Candice, for the opportunity. Julian, thank you so much for this presentation. However, we are grappling with the theory testing and model construction. I'm coming from an economic background. How can one use the tool model construction and theory testing? Number two, how would you suggest to us who are looking at the young people of different age groups? Because some of the age groups given by the call, as you go into data collection and so forth, we may find that some of them are minor, may not be in position to be interviewed, and they need some guidance, permission, ethical clearance, and so forth. How could you go about that? Then lastly, how many theories are applicable to this call? Can one have more than theories, like maybe 5 or whatever you choose that are relevant to your study? Or if I can't, I feel that I'm not competent enough to come up with the theories that are relevant to my study, can one stick to model construction from an economic point of view? Thank you so much, Candice, for the time given to me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Julian, you got those. Charlene, I'm going to ask you also just a little bit on the how many theories later on. And yeah, I think that's the questions that we have. Colleagues, we are going to have some time later on. Welcome back, Angelique, to just chat through some of these questions, and we'll be in our sessions as well to discuss some of that. Angelique, can I?
Yes, thank you. I had to do some relational hip hopping here with my with my different devices. Sorry, I was kicked out.
You're breaking up a little bit. We can't hear you at all now. Still not. Okay. Do you mind if we continue, and then we'll just come back? Okay. Okay, great. Colleagues, we're going to move on to the next session now. And this session is really going to be a little bit more applied to what we are interested in. I'm just trying to share my screen as I'm speaking. Let me just make sure that I am sharing appropriately. Can you see my screen? Are we all good? Quick thumbs up. Yeah.
Good.
So great. Thanks, Angelique. So what I'm going to talk about now is, I think, going to relate to some of the questions around the actual proposals and so forth. But this is really how we, as the YouGood team, are thinking about monitoring and evaluation towards strategic learning. Normally, we speak about monitoring and evaluation for and strategic learning. But I've rephrased this towards strategic learning because we are very much interested in learning about this model. And if I think about how Julian has presented these two frameworks, and my psychologist friend, I'm with you, I'm also from that discipline. We also had to think about, are we interested in this notion of correctness, or are we wanting to test the usefulness of this particular framework? And for us, it has been around the usefulness. I guess the primary reason for this is that we recognize that what we are doing through this work is somewhat experimental in its scope, that we are able to test this particular framework in so many different spaces. And our hope is, an intention through the work is to actually build that, as I said earlier, I'm just trying to find my notes, the transferable knowledge across these different spaces, but recognizing that there will be things that are very contextually relevant. And as Alina said, that's also important in the work that we are doing. So I'm going to speak through and introduce you to how we're thinking about MESL and strategic learning specifically through the lens of developmental evaluation as a potential relational approach to strategic learning in the work that we are doing. So monitoring and evaluation towards strategic learning is an integral component of YouGood. Angelique explained yesterday that there are different kind of packages that we are interested in the work. And so on the one hand, we are interested obviously in funding the research, but on the other hand, we also have an interest in research itself. So as much as you as researchers are doing the implementation on the ground, we are also studying what you are doing in order to learn about this particular framework. And so MESL is essential for us because it ensures that the program is implemented efficiently and effectively, that the research is conducted in a rigorous way and of high quality and standard, and that we are able to generate outputs and findings that are elevated and translated in a way that it becomes meaningful learning experiences for different audiences. Now, different audiences here.
Excuse me, Candice.
Candice, are you in slide mode? Sorry, in presentation mode?
I am. Am I not?
It's not reflecting in that way, Candice.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No. Thank you. I was hoping. Let me just try again because I was on. What are you seeing at the moment?
I don't think we're seeing the correct screen if you are working on another one.
Okay, let me just try again. Sorry about that, everyone. Is this better?
That's right. That's right. Thank you.
Okay. Great. So this is where I was at now. Okay, so I'm just trying to think where I was speaking about. So when we speak about the different audiences that we are interested in this work, we are referring to not only our academic community, of course, and we've been saying this over the past couple of seminars or webinars that we've had, that it's not just about the academic community. We are also interested in how useful this approach is for young people, for key stakeholders in government and civil society, funding agencies, local community leaders, members. We could have a whole range of groups here reflected. And aligned with the relational wellbeing framework that we presented yesterday also, it's essential that we think of monitoring and evaluation for strategic learning, that it is situated within relational working. We spoke a bit about that yesterday. But this really for us, it means embedding what we are doing in collaborative practice. And so that does not only mean how we are implementing the work, but also how we are studying what we are interested in. It means employing ways of working that fosters active involvement, participation, reflection, and learnings from all stakeholders. Now, this might feel like a lot, as Charlene said yesterday, as you are engaging with what we are doing, it might be something where you have to think about, can I do this? Because we do want to have active involvement and participation and reflection from our researchers. But we are also doing that as researchers ourselves. We are also doing that as researchers and different groups that are working together to understand how this relational way of working and the framework as a whole applies for us. And the intention is really about creating collective learning, informed decision-making, informed implementation, and critical reflection to ensure the successful implementation of the project from inception to conclusion, which is why we've had various different activities or webinars and engagements and sessions that from the start, from before we started the, from the start of the program and to where we start funding, to as the program goes along and to conclusion, we want to ensure that there's this critical thinking happening, reflections going on, collective learning happening through the different groups that we also in community of practice meetings that we will have. So Dorothy spoke a bit about this yesterday in her session, for those who weren't here. But this really just summarizes how relational working has manifested for us as a team. And this is something that I've kind of started thinking about. What would be some of those principles or some of those experiences that are important for us to highlight when we think of relational working? I know another colleague yesterday in the afternoon session was speaking about how difficult relational working can be, and this is very, very true. But I put this down here, and you can see a range of different kind of keywords popping up. Obviously, the normal ones that we would go towards is consultation and partnership, collective investment, and common goal, team, for example. But there's also other factors around relational working that could be quite difficult or timeless to be able to kind of get through. So the things that we've learned is that there's a lot of patience required, flexibility, there's a lot of dialogue. And I was going in between dialogue and communication. And I feel communication is sometimes a little bit more of a watered down perspective, where dialogue for me is about, there's a lot of talking and listening and engagement happening around how the work needs to be done. There's also roles and responsibilities, of course. There's trust that what we are doing is useful, what you are doing is useful, and that we will trust each other, and that we will offer support and guidance and receive support and guidance in the process of working together. There's transparency, and I think for us it's about that common goal, that common and that collective investment around understanding how this framework is going to work. I state this because this is the position that we have worked from as a team, but that we also want to bring into the evaluation component of the work. It does mean, Charlene said this yesterday as well, that we are going to have a lot of engagements, that we want to touch base with you, but we also want to offer support as much as we can without interfering with what you're doing. So without being a confounding variable to your study, but still being present and available for the work that you are doing. So from that perspective, this is how we came to developmental evaluation as a potentially relational approach to strategic learning. And it's because of we needed to think about what approach or design, if we can call it in that way, is going to help us to answer our aims and objectives that we have for the study, but also work in this relational way. And so the work of Michael Patton, I've just cited a few of his references here. We're going to share the slides so you will have access to these. His work has been really great at helping us frame what relational evaluation might look like for this particular program of work. So developmental evaluation, like I said, was pioneered by Michael Patton. And the primary focus of this approach is on real-time learning in complex and emergent situations. And so this applies to YouGood because this is something that we want to do around real-time learning, but the setup or the makeup of YouGood as a whole is complex and the learnings are going to be emergent. So it does align with what we want to do in YouGood. And it also aligns because the focus is on initiatives that have multiple stakeholders, which we have. This high level of innovation, which we have and we will have once we fund our own projects. Fast-paced decision-making is definitely something that occurs. And there are areas of uncertainty that we still need to develop. One of that is that we don't know what we are going to fund and what the topics are going to specifically be about. So it allows us that flexibility to do the work in the way that we are required to do it. Now, again, for those, and there are a few of us in the room that have done and that have proposed to do some more structured evaluation or intervention development or testing or measurement and so forth. And for those who are familiar with this kind of approach, often in more traditional evaluations, the evaluator sits external to the program or the intervention that's being evaluated. But because of our relational way of working and we want to be involved and we want to learn from within, developmental evaluation allows for the evaluator to be part of the team. And again, this aligns with our relational well-being, relational working perspective. And it also, as I will show in the principle, there's a strong focus on continuous strategic learning to understand how the initiatives that is being implemented can be refined and strengthened over time, provided in this space. So as much as DE is a framework for how we can do it, there's no specific methodology on how this must happen, which again allows us to think alternatively about the methods or the approaches that we want to use for learning, which I'll share a little bit later, which also then again works with our relational working perspective, because we do want to consult around that with the funded projects. And we are also able to use DE and use our relational wellbeing framework collectively to understand how the work unfolds over time. So it's not too prescriptive, but obviously I think as our colleague Angelique likes to speak about the ontology and epistemology of this framework, it has a very particular, or this framework has a particular ontology and epistemology, but the methodologies that we can use is flexible in that way. So what does developmental evaluation in YouGood look like? So through the relational wellbeing framework, the overall intention really is of YouGood is to promote more invested and collective approaches to how we research, how we understand, how we respond to, how we address, and we could add other words into there, and how we prioritize young people in the global south. So that's what we're hoping this framework is going to do. So we almost see the framework as this conceptual intervention that will ultimately guide different audiences on the development, the value, the critique, or the implementation of models. And I use this very loosely, that would facilitate relational thinking, working, and gathering with the intention to promote well-being of young people in the global south and hopefully beyond. But as we know, we don't know how useful this model is yet, which is why we are doing this particular project at the moment. And so what I want to speak to now is just the objectives that we have, and speaking to, we don't know how useful this is and why we're needing to test, and framing what some of those research questions are that we have in relation to the objectives. And in framing it in this way, I'm hoping that this would help you frame out, in the same way as Julian's presentation did, help you frame out what you would like to do and how your work aligns with the objectives. So our first objective is to test and further develop this framework. And again, just as a reminder, the framework is about relational thinking, gathering, and working. So when we look at relational thinking, we are really interested in understanding what are those models, those theories, those frameworks, those concepts, those approaches that help us to study, to respond to prioritize and conceptualize youth well-being in the Global South. So those relational models or thinking, frameworks, concepts, and so forth. And then what are those models, frameworks, and so forth that help us to expand this relational well-being framework that we have? So we were talking about Julian's presentation, and someone was asking about theory testing yesterday and today, and how do we incorporate that into this work? And sometimes the theory testing is about finding a theory that explains something, but sometimes we hope some of the theories are going to be about how do we expand this model. So we're interested at both levels when we think about relational thinking. Relational gathering here, we're focusing on the methodological approaches that you will use. And this could be your designs, your frameworks, your models, your scales, your measurements, all those other methodological terminologies that is going to help us to study very broadly here, whether we are exploring, examining, describing, unpacking, and help us to advance through intervention, through research as well, but practice and policy, the well-being of young people in the Global South. So the methodological approach is what is useful to be able to do that from a relational gathering perspective. And then zoning in on our interest on young people, which methodological approaches, as described above, promote meaningful and active participant and or stakeholder engagement in research and practice with young people and for young people and by young people in the Global South. So thinking about how does your study and the concepts and the approaches that you are using in your proposal allow us to answer some of these questions, because that's how we are going to be looking at it. And then lastly, relational working is about the ways in which, or the practices, or the ways in which that the ways of working that we employ that will promote active and meaningful and invested collaborations or partnerships with young people and other beneficiaries in the Global South. And then which practices or ways of working promote active, meaningful, and invested collaborations and partnerships with the research consortium. So not just the young people, but everybody else that you are engaging in the work that you are doing. What are some of those ways that facilitates that collaboration and partnership? So we want to learn about these things. These are probably just some of the questions that we have, but at a broad level, I hope that this will help you to think through how you frame your work and how you could answer some of these questions in your proposals. So that's our first objective, right? Our second objective is about generating empirical insights into the contemporary challenges with and for young people's well-being. And here our question is very much again related to this particular relational well-being framework. So how does employing relational thinking, as we explained earlier, relational gathering in that way, relational working approaches, respectively and combined, how does this allow us to generate empirical insights into the challenges that young people face and understand how young people are responding to those challenges? So not just how does it, but also does it? Where are the challenges? What is working? What is not working? So we really want to understand this framework in a little bit more detail to what we have right now. So what is operationalizing the MESL framework for YouGood then look like through this developmental evaluation perspective? And I'm just showing this particular slide here. There are these 4 practices that are aligned with developmental evaluation. I won't go through them in too much detail, but I just wanted to show you that it is quite what's the word I'm looking for? A complex model that has various different components to it. And so there's orienting, there's observing or gathering information, there's sense making at the bottom, and then intervention and support. So orienting is really aligned with what we have been doing and what we will be doing. And the intention here is to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So these capacity development seminars that we had in the past, that we will have going forward, the engagements that we will have with sessions and so forth, all of that is to orient, to ensure that we are all on the same page and that we feel supported in the work that we are doing. There's observing and gathering, and as implied in the terminology, it's about gathering the information that we would like to have to learn about the processes that you are employing and how that works in the field. And I'll speak to that a bit more detail just now. Sense making, bringing it all together, analyzing and interpreting and synthesizing everything together to understand how this model actually works on the ground. And then intervention support for my more structured evaluation colleagues. This is not about interfering with the actual work that is happening, but it is about being present and understanding that there might be some things that are happening in the field that we might require a little bit more support from our side. And no, this does not mean more money, but it does mean perhaps identifying what some of those support strategies might be. What are some of the factors or the challenges that people are facing, perhaps as different countries are working together or working in different spaces? How do we accommodate for some of that, and how do we talk through, how do we link if someone is not understanding or grappling with a particular concept, how do we link them to someone, as Angelique spoke yesterday about the different advisory groups that we will have, to be able to provide that kind of support for the researcher. So in essence, this is the framework that developmental evaluation is really about. And I've really given a very, very quick synopsis of this. But I want to just now speak to how we are thinking about generating or gathering the learnings that we would like to have. And I want to display this as a way to help you, or to let you know what we are going to be expecting of you throughout this project. So gathering learnings is going to happen in different ways. We have kind of 4 groups of or categories in which we will generate or gather learnings for now. This might change, and again, once we have the funded projects, we are going to have another session about building this out a little bit more. And so yes, the first thing is about our yearly reports. And this is, I think we all expected that. We're going to have yearly reports, and the intention there is to have these progress reports that we'll be asking you to gather ongoing learning. So insights here will be framed around illustrating the value of your work to facilitate relational thinking, gathering, and working. And I really want to emphasize this, that we are not only interested in the theory component, we are interested in the framework as a whole. So how your work is contributing to how we understand thinking, gathering, and working. And again, towards advancing the well-being of young people in the Global South. So we might ask questions such as, what did you say you were going to do? So looking at those actionable focus areas that you have, what did you actually do and what progress has been made? So identifying those progress markers. And there we might think about what has shifted in the way, for example, you've applied a particular theory. Let's say you identified a certain theory around relational well-being, or your relational thinking theory is a particular theory, and you have engaged with this. And as you move along, you're building it, you're expanding it, you're shifting it, you're changing. You might find and learn different things, and we want to document what that is. what has stagnated? Are there certain ways of working, for example, that you thought would work well, that you planned to work in a certain way, but that didn't go in the way that you thought it would? And so what are those things that have stagnated? What is about to change that you could see happen, and what has the potential to change, are some of the questions that we might phrase in these yearly reports that we will ask you. Of course, we're interested in the challenges and the obstacles that you are facing, and how you're also addressing some of these challenges and obstacles in the work that you do. And this is not just related to implementation, so that something was happening in a community and you couldn't continue with your work, but it's also about how you are working together, how you are gathering your information, how your frameworks around relational thinking has played out in an applied way. And of course, we have to ask about the impact of your work, or the potential impact of your work. We know in the first year it's difficult, and sometimes even in the last year it's very difficult to talk about the impact that your work has had. So we do want to reflect on also the potential impact that your work has had, or may have in future. So potential impact in terms of to contribute to the relational well-being framework and expand that, or contribute that, or build on it, or support it, or refute it perhaps. But also contribute in terms of how your work can advance the well-being of young people in the global south. And then we'll be interested in what some of those next steps might be in the work that you do. So that would be in our yearly reports that we would ask. We also want to do some mid-year check-ins. And as I said earlier, we're interested in understanding how we can support you. And this would be fairly short kind of check-ins, but we would do something like a 360 evaluation, and we'll have some short questions. So what should we start doing? What should we stop doing? What do you appreciate about the program? So in order for us to understand how are you feeling supported, and what can we do to better facilitate that support and guidance in the program. And yeah, we are likely to share this through a link for ease of completion, and obviously provide some feedback on that as well. The third way is, and Charlene spoke about this also, is our community of practice that we have, or that we will expect the researchers to be part of, that will not only include the researchers, but also our advisory groups, our youth groups, and so forth. And so researchers will attend the COP sessions throughout the year, every year. There'll be COP sessions, and some sessions will take, in the way that we'll gather information or gather learnings in the session, we will ask our PIs to present some of their work, and we will use the framework here around the most significant change that you observe through the work. And the intention is for you to share your stories of change, and also to reflect on what those key learnings are in relation to the particular, to the relational well-being framework. And the intention of sharing it in the COP is that you are able to then facilitate discussions with other people, have critical engagement, and there will be cross-cutting synergies that we could also identify in the work that we do. So it's not just about the learnings in the COP, but it's also about the networking that it facilitates, and the critical thinking that it facilitates for you and for us, to advance the work that we are doing collectively. And then fourthly, we have our conferences that we will be hosting over the next few years. And you will be presenting your work at the conferences, and we will gather learnings in the work that you present, in the papers that you develop, and the presentations that there will be. There will also be workshops that would be held there that we can gather some learnings from. And the conference plan is yet to be developed, of course. We still don't know who we are funding, but the aim is really to capture ongoing progress, lessons learned in terms of the framework that we have, and then also to host some workshops to collectively think about relational well-being in the framework and how we can build upon this. So again, for us, our learnings is not just about you need to generate 5 papers and off we go. It's about relational working. Again, it's a lot of engagement that we will do. But we hope that there will be a lot of learnings through that engagement that happens. Lastly, almost done with my slides. I want to just talk about synthesizing. So we will gather learnings in those particular ways, but we also want to synthesize learnings in a relational way as far as we can. We recognize, obviously, that as the research team, we have to hold. And so as much as we want to work collaboratively and relationally, that also means recognizing that there are roles and responsibilities, as I said earlier, around the work that we're doing. So as the research team, we will hold driving some of the synthesizing, but we definitely want to consult and have that critical thinking through the different platforms that I described earlier. And so how do we synthesize and I guess share some of these learnings is yearly updates that we want to do. And this is now, I guess, in some ways, our responsibility to you, our collective responsibility driven by us. We want to have yearly updates. This could be written or virtual, written briefs or virtual engagements on what we are learning so far. And I think this would also be useful for us to for us as what we're learning, but also for you to have some of those learnings as you go along, because that might also advance the work that you are doing. Strategic briefs, we are working on some of them for once the projects are funded next year around relational thinking, gathering and working. And we want to think about what that is now and do another strategic brief at the end of the program to see how things have shifted and changed and gather those learnings that we've had. Obviously, we'll host some conference sessions where we will talk about what we are learning thus far and engage with you on some of that. We do want to do podcasts, and we also have our documentary at the bottom, but we're thinking of having podcasts that are facilitated through our thematic leads on the key learnings per theme. So as just reminders, we've got the 4 themes and our 4 thematic leads that are working on this program of work. And so what are some of those learnings at that level that we can document? That's not just a paper, but that's perhaps something that we can share to different audiences a little bit easier. And then we cannot forget our academic outputs that we have that I think we all are familiar with. Charlene and the team, we are all very interested in doing a book project around the work that will be generated. Obviously, we'll have our academic articles based on thematic learnings that we want to do. You will have your academic articles that you want to write based on your learnings on your work. There will be conference reports and policy briefs and so forth that could be generated through this work. And then lastly, we have a documentary component, which is not completely fully fleshed out yet. But this is another way for us to synthesize the learnings through this program, is to document the program processes, including learnings from different partners. So whether these are our researchers or young people, different advisory groups that we have, us as implementing partners, our funders, the students that you will have in your sessions, and other beneficiaries that might be willing to speak to us about the value of this work. For understanding the value of or the usefulness of the relational wellbeing framework for youth in the Global South. So quite a few bits and pieces that we are wanting to engage with to synthesize learnings. But yeah, a lot of work, I think, from our side and your side in hopefully making this program a success. I'm going to stop there, Angelique, and just say thank you. And I hope that this was useful.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Candice. I think it's been very useful for us to reflect now up until this point on the sort of available approaches to theory testing that Julian has shared with us, and then now to marry it with the notion of relational evaluation within YouGood. And as Candice has indicated, there's a lot of work for us to do in the background to ensure that the program reaches its objectives. And so that, and the reason that we shared our approach to relational evaluation with you is to just already start sensitizing around the kind of information that we will require at different points in time, so that you can understand how it feeds into our assessment of the impact of the whole program. So thank you very much for that, Candice. It was indeed quite a lot of detail, but I do think it is important to have that information for people, and so we will obviously share our slides, and it's useful for them to have that level of detail to understand. With that, we are a little bit early, but I think we can go directly into the slot for just raising some questions for clarity, particularly now around relational evaluation as operationalized now for YouGood. There will, of course, be another opportunity for us in our breakaway discussions to return to some of that discussion that I saw was quite animated around theory testing. But for now, can we just maybe get a sense of any questions for clarity for Candice around what she has presented on the way in which YouGood is going to approach the monitoring and evaluation and strategic learning component of this work, which is also very important. I see Vera has got her actual hand up, not a virtual hand, and she's put on her video. So I would like to give her an opportunity to ask a question.
Thanks.
Thank you, Vera.
This relational space allows me to show myself. So thank you so much.
Yes, we love it.
So I just want to make sure. Yesterday we learned, and in July we also learned about this relational well-being theory proposed by White and Jo, I think that's her name. But then you also talk about another conceptual framework or model, and that is the relational thinking, doing, working, and gathering. So if you say that you want to build knowledge, is it on the theoretical framework of White et al., or is it actually the three components that you have explained to us? And thank you so much for all the detail. It's really useful. So thank you so much for that. But if you can just help me clarify that, that's one part of my question. The other part of my question is, when I looked at the keywords that you showed us in terms of relational, I just want to get there, relational working. That's relational working. When I look at those words, if I look at it on different logical levels, I can see some of it are relational outcomes, but some of it are the mechanisms that actually facilitates those outcomes. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, 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 you do.
Good.
Yes,
Thank
you
you.
do. Yes, yes.
But if you can just help me clarifying the model and the theory.
Yeah, okay. So Candice, you can elaborate on your response to the second question. Maybe just allow me to speak to the first question that Vera raised first, and then you can add. Vera, I'm not sure if you were at yesterday, if you were able to attend yesterday's session, and then maybe I wasn't very clear that the main purpose of this program is to engage, it must engage with a relational well-being approach as concretized by White and Jaw. But in doing so, we needed to find a way to guide researchers on how they do that. How should they engage with the relational well-being approach as operationalized by Jaw and White? And that's why we then came up with a very simplistic notion of saying we need to think of it epistemologically, we need to think of the ontology, and we need to think of the methodology. And to be able to represent those three things, we said relational working because it needs to engage with relational working, it needs to engage with relational thinking. That essentially, we basically, those two components we take essentially from White and Jaw's model. But in addition, when you apply it in practice, you need to think carefully in terms of the relational gathering as well. And so the model remains White and Jaw, but our simplistic model is just to assist you in applying it in practice in your research.
That makes a lot of sense. Can I just ask then, linking that back to Julian's presentation earlier this afternoon, So in terms of theory testing then of White and Jaw, we can then focus on that theory and a component of that theory and either critique, complement it with other theories on relational well-being, because there are other theories related to relational well-being. Maybe you can just help me to clarify. Well-being and relational well-being in all the presentations sometimes are used simultaneously. Is that intentional, that relational well-being is well-being? Or do you also distinguish between well-being and relational well-being?
So let me answer that one, because I think we distinguish between relational well-being and well-being, because well-being is a broader construct. Material well-being is theories of material well-being, subjective well-being, multidimensional well-being. And what we have done is we have put together a literature review that we've published on the website. It's about 30 pages long, where we go into all of the features, not just looking at White and Jaw, and we wanted that to be available as a resource. So if you haven't seen that, that's a little shortcut that we did as a secretariat before we put out the call for expressions of interest.
Thank you.
And also we've said that there's some issues where it hasn't been called relational well-being, but there are other models that are very similar to White and Jaw. So all of those are things that we want these programs of research, these research studies to look at and to think about. So while I've got the floor, let me also answer that previous question, is how many theories can you use? And so I think the colleague who asked that question, we want you to use the White and Jaw theory, right? And if you think that you have a competing theory, then by all means bring it in. If you think that there are some economic theories that achieve the same outcomes or achieve better outcomes for young people, then you bring that in. But what we don't want to see is you using 5 different theories, because that's not the intention of this program of research. So I want to make that very clear. Competing, comparing, better than, but you really need to use the White and Jaw's theory as the launch pad for all of the work that you're doing.
Yeah. And Charlene, I think it also speaks to what Julian was speaking this morning around sensitizing concepts, right? So the theory then serves as, it's less structured, but it serves as a source of inspiration and providing a broad framework for inspiration in the work that you were doing. Doesn't necessarily have to be the theory, but if you are bringing other theories in, you have to use that as a starter. Aline, sorry, Charlene, I cut you off there. Did you want to continue? No, you're good.
Thanks, thanks, Candice. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to provide Aline an opportunity also now just to come in here, but as also I think shared yesterday, the whole impetus of this program is around the work that Foundation Botna has done in so many countries around intervening to improve the well-being of young people. And so in this approach resonating with the foundation, they really wanted to test it empirically. And so that is a very key impetus of this work and the funding of this work. And so that is the reason that we ask all of the work to engage with the usefulness of this approach. Thanks, Aline. You can
maybe just following on that, I would say, to be pragmatic, you don't need to test all the aspects of the theory, because what we think is important is that you have a real case or some cases where you want to change something, and then you can see, okay, how this theory or another one helps you, but it can be just using one part of it or highlighting one part, which is just suited to the action that you want to do. So I think it is also good enough to be thorough about one part of what the theory moves or helps not in regard of what you want to do with young people together for young people.
Thank you for that, Aline. Are there any other questions? Unfortunately, when I got kicked out, I lost all of the questions that were in the chat before. So if people can please raise their hands if we have some time for another 1 or 2 questions around the relational evaluation aspect of UGOOD. Does anybody want to run away with the amount of things that we're going to ask you to do?
And I think while we're waiting for some more hands, Angelique, I think that's really important. So colleagues, I said it yesterday and I'm repeating myself because I think it's so important, that you may have gotten used to in your academic institution and in calls that come where a funder will say there's money to do some research, you know, you win the grant, you go away, you do your research, and then you write a book or publications. This is not that kind of program of research. This is a program of research where you've got a team of researchers like myself and Angelique and Candice and Christian and Cindy Lee and Dorothy and her team, where we are researching this bigger notion of how do we really improve the well-being of young people across the global south. That's the big question. And in order for us to answer that question, we're asking 23 research projects to investigate some aspect of how do we really make sure that we are doing the best that we can to improve the well-being of young people. We think that relational well-being is a key in order to achieve that. And so your projects are going to tell us whether that is right or that is wrong, and not just the correctness, but the strength of this approach. And we think that we will walk together over the next 4 years, because it's 3 years of your study, this initial phase, and then a kind of a wrap-up phase. And we're going to talk at conferences, we're going to ask you about your research, we're going to listen to your research, we're going to add some pieces of capacity development along the way. So in one sense, this feels more like a bit of a marriage, right, than just a casual dating relationship. We want to find a team of researchers, fund you, assist you. We want you to assist us in our thinking about relational well-being for young people. We want to help the Foundation Botnar to infuse it into their programs, but we want other funders to be able to infuse it into programs, and NGOs to infuse it into their programs. So it's both exciting, but it is daunting. And that's why we think that these 3 days of capacity development thinking through will help you go, actually, this is what I really want to do, and I'm going to put my heart and soul into writing the proposal. Or you're going to say, actually, what I wanted to do was I wanted to investigate a theory of economic and happiness with regards to well-being, and so it doesn't fit what I'm trying to do with my work. And we want you to be able to make that decision, giving you as much information as possible.
Thanks, Charlene. I'm going to just recognize Judith and Okello. Judith, you and Okello can be the last 2 inputs, and then I'll guide us on the breakaway. Judith, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, just in the spirit of the relationality, I'll turn on my video. I'm just thinking, and thanks for the presentation in terms of that we've had this afternoon, but thinking in terms of the relational working, I'm trying to understand how we would define the relationships between ourselves and the project team going forward, and how that would how it would work in such a way that it doesn't become overbearing or disruptive in just the freedom of thinking and expressing and engaging with the whole process. Would each team be assigned a key person or like a thematic kind of coordinator who becomes the first point of call, and even in terms of the communication lines, so that it's productive and we're working efficiently going forward?
Thank you, Judith. I think that's quite clear, and I'll respond to that question, but I just want to give Okello an opportunity to ask another question, and then I'll deal with both of them.
Thank you so much, Angelina, for once again for the opportunity. Yeah, I'm trying to build from what Professor Charlene Swaz presented, and also recalling in the previous month webinar that we had with you. You highlighted the aspect of age, the age component. Apparently, you know that countries have different, yes, we have international standards on different defining of the age of young person and so forth. Now, could you, because I didn't get the answer on this. Yes, you said that one needs to provide a clear motivation or justification as to why you want to go up to the certain age group and so forth. Can it be possible for you to unanimously to say, yes, from age 10 to 24 or 10 to 30 something, 18 years and so forth, because this is really disturbing us a lot, especially when we are trying to conceptualize in terms of the theory testing, coming up with the conceptual framework to help us complete our proposal. But we are stuck when it comes to age. How do we handle those who are minor? Because some of the respondents we hope might be, using the word might be child-headed households who are living in different areas. And the rules of engagement, you may need to seek permission to interact with such persons. Do you think you can adjust on the age component so that it becomes uniform? Thank you.
Thank you, Okello. I'm going to ask Charlene. I have a response to that age one, but I think maybe Charlene can add, and I see Aline's mic is also unmuted. So I'll ask her to add, but Charlene, you can go ahead, and I mean, obviously I can point people to the research call document, which clarifies the exact grouping that we are interested in, and also provides the subcategories within that grouping. I would first indicate that people should go and look at the call again around the age grouping, but Charlene can give more insight.
Well, I think I want to just comment on things like ethics, which Otello has raised. You are going to have to get ethical clearance for your study. And if it is a young person under the age of 18, it's going to need parental or guardian permission. And so that is without question. Now, what happens if you're working with a child-headed household? There must be some form of oversight. And so those become some things that are technical, and we might do a capacity development session or a conversation in our community of practice about that, because you always need to ensure protection of the person who's participating. So ethics is one question. I think what the call is saying is that 10 to 24 is the age group. If you would like to go beyond that, there needs to be a very good reason for it. But also there's a big debate in the Global South, right? Why has it been that youth is defined up to 35? And it's because it's been as a result of young people's inability to find a job or to find independence. And so we are quite committed to that 10 to 24-year-old age group. And I think that that's important. If you've got a particular issue in your study that you want to raise with us, then please do that. But we're not going to entertain a study, for example, that only focuses on young adults from age 25 to 35, because that falls completely out of scope. But if you're wanting to say young adults from 18 to 30, and you've got a really good justification for that, we can hear that.
And I think maybe this is a point, Charlene, that maybe Aline maybe wants to add, because I think there's a conceptual and a kind of debate around the category of youth, which we know in the Global South can be extended and protracted, and so that's why it tends to be higher. But I think this was, or the selection of the particular focus was also based on the foundation's focus of the interventions that they do is in that age group. And so that also drove part of, because we actually had quite a bit of debate around this, even as, as the research team. And so maybe Aline can also just give us a little bit of insight around that.
Yeah, this was very much linked to our, let's say, focus age group. And first we had this definition, I think it was the Lancet or the ratio of 10 to 18. Then we recognized it is really too low, so we went to 24. But now if the discussion and the debate is in the South that 24 is not good enough. And I fully subscribe with Charlene. If there are good reasons why for this context or for this country, this is going to include some young people up to 30, and there is a good reason, then it might shift our understanding of this. It might inform our discussion later on. So if all the projects, this is a problem, and there is a good rationale for that, then of course this will be also an information for us. But indeed, it was matched to what we are now considering our age group of the young people.
And maybe I want to add to what Aline is saying. If you have a really good proposal and you propose an age group that we think we don't think that you've got compelling reasons for proposing that age group, we're not going to disqualify you from selection. We're going to approve the study and then engage with you about making sure that that age group is the age group that we are looking for in the study. So please don't be afraid that you do one thing wrong and you're thrown out. Not at all. We want this to be developmental. We want this to be engaged and egalitarian. So I think that's important also to know.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, just to reiterate some of the comments of yesterday, is that really the scientific importance is the major weighting item, you know, in our evaluation of proposals. Yes, there's quite a few other aspects around countries and age groups, etc., that we will take into consideration, but the quality of the proposal really needs to be at the level that we are going to look at those other aspects as we decide the final list. Candice, I see that your hand is raised.
Yeah,
is it something quick?
Yeah, very quick. No, I just wanted to, just on this topic, just to make a plea to everyone to actually disclose the age groups. We've had quite a few people that did not indicate.
That didn't.
People would just say youth. I think more than, almost 50% of people would just say young people. And we weren't sure about who they are focusing on. And so to just, while we are evaluating in the next phase, to be explicit about what young people means to you. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Candice, for that input. Colleagues, I would like us to close on this now, and I want us to prepare to go into the breakaway sessions where we will deal with 2 questions. I want us to, I'll give everybody 5 minutes. You can have a little bit of a legroom break, go to the bathroom, go to get a cup of tea, and then, but you will be put into your room. So we will all reconstitute in our breakaway rooms at about in 5 minutes time. So that will be 3:07. And we will be dealing with the 2 questions, which will also be broadcast. But the 2 questions are, based on what was presented today, was anything unclear, or do you require any further information on theory testing? That's the first question. And then secondly, we will deal with a question, are there any challenges that you foresee in aligning your work to the monitoring and evaluation and strategic learning framework of UGood as presented by Candice? So those are the 2 questions that will guide our discussion. And as I said, we will have 5 minutes just to transition from this virtual room into the next one, grab a cup of coffee or water, and then we will see you at 3:07 in your breakaway room. Thank you.
Go. Evo, kuidani.
What are you eating, Candice?
I've got energy today. I'm eating like a chocolate digestive biscuit.
Right. Thank you. I think we are all funneling back. I just want to take a moment while we are funneling back to just acknowledge. I just want to acknowledge our NRF colleagues that I didn't introduce well enough. Because I got confused with tomorrow and today. So I just want to acknowledge Dr. Dorothy Ngila, who is the lead on the NRF side on this program, that is part here with us today and spending the day with us, as well as Ms. Zodwa Mbuyazi, who is part of the who is a research officer on this program and dedicated to this program. So I just want to acknowledge those two NRF colleagues that are also in the room here. Don't barrage them now with NRF related questions.
I just wanted to you dropped out in a previous session. There was a question that was posed to Julian earlier that we didn't get to earlier. So if you could just, as we are discussing, give him an opportunity to respond. Thanks.
Okay, so before then we move into just the responses of this session, maybe Julian can respond on that question. Candice, I don't know, maybe you guys can restate the question because I do not have access to it.
Thanks, Angelique. I have to flip back my pages with the notes to the appropriate page. Hang on.
It seems like Charlene's at the ready there.
Yeah, I think it was the question on theory testing and model construction, or model development. I can't remember. I think if I see the name, I don't know who asked it.
No, Julius Okello, I think it was one of.
I was just going to say that sounds like an Okello question.
Yeah. So I think he had multiple aspects in his question, and we have spoken about the ethics element. Charlene has alluded to that. And then we've also spoken about the issue of how many theories. And he has stated that he has a background in economics. And I think Charlene has also clarified already in a way that you're welcome to bring in your economics background as long as you also make sure that relational well-being is kind of the starting point to which you compare the insights that you would generate with the specific economic approaches that you want to bring in additionally, unless, which I think in principle could be possible, but I'm not quite sure if you wanted to state that you are thinking of having a model that integrates both the economic reasoning that are your starting point or your main background and relational well-being. But I think economics can certainly contribute as long as you make sure where then in comparison to relational well-being, these insights that you want to generate would be standing. That's what I have on his questions. And then before that, we had a question on epistemology and on ontology. And I was just going to say that as stated early in this call today, people who are engaging in the, let's say, correctness version of testing have usually a positivist, other people would also say a naturalist ontology, and they would state that you can study the social world in a way that's similar to studying the natural world. And I think that's often a kind of a key difference. And then there's various things that follow from that. And one of the things could be that you pay less attention to context and that you are rather convinced that you can have rather general theories that are applicable in various contexts. Whereas when you're more into this usefulness, you have a more interpretative ontology and epistemology, and you say, we have the possibility to create knowledge, but it's always going to be context dependent and can be transferred only to a limited degree. That's what I have here regarding questions that we couldn't respond to at the end of the first session. Thanks for giving me the time.
Thank you, Julian. We have 20 more minutes that we can try to bring together a lot of the discussions across the 8 rooms. I probably have about 10 points coming from my group. But I want to provide an opportunity for people to raise their hands if they feel that their concerns in relation to these two questions were not covered. But I want to first provide for the theory testing discussion, and then I'll provide for the MESL discussion. So with regards to the theory testing, was there any sort of challenges, need for more information that emerged from any of the groups that we want to bring into the main discussion? I mean, I can start off just to say that one point that was quite interesting from our discussion was this balance between this theory testing that was presented today, which requires us to be quite clear around what it is we intend to do and what it is we intend to explore and how we're going to do that, as opposed to some of the work that was shared yesterday, which talks more to participatory, emancipatory kind of work that centers young people. And so how do we bring those two together? And I thought that was quite a nice question to bring into a bigger discussion, because it wasn't something that I thought that I would do justice to, but I think it starts to speak to the core intentions of this work. So I thought that was a nice one to bring into the discussion. Joseph, Dr. Joseph Mushi, you want to add?
Yes, I want to raise something that emerged in our group. Actually, it comes into our attention that sometimes in theory testing, especially on relation well-being, our much focus, as it has been emphasized, should be on the age group between 10 to 24. But sometimes the relation well-being of this age group sometimes can involve a lot of other stakeholders. For instance, much of the decision makers in a lot of countries in global south is composed of older people with an old age, or at least age that is not between 10 to 24. So when you talk of relational well-being, sometimes in order to at least balance between the individual needs and the collective well-beings, you have to touch some stakeholders who are not in the specified age group. So we are trying to discuss on how to balance when you are doing the CO testing, and how to balance between the decision makers. Well, for instance, when you are addressing maybe your issues on relation well-being, you need also to involve the decision makers who are not in the age group of this. So it was coming to at our attentions, and we decided maybe we should take it back to the main group, at least to have that discussions. Maybe also Julian will give us an highlights on how to balance between this.
I mean, I can just go, and I think Aline could also just answer that question. I don't think that there's anything that precludes you from employing such an approach to exploring the well-being of young people. The core focus is, of course, positive impact on well-being for young people, but the relational well-being approach totally supports that kind of perspective that you are talking about. So I don't think that it precludes the inclusion of any other stakeholders, because remember, as we spoke about, as Shreya presented to us yesterday, it really thinks about young people, the individual that is located across systems, institutions, the environment. There are so many different dependencies, and that is actually what the relationality also refers to in the approach. I don't think it precludes the inclusion of other age groups as well to understand the well-being of young people. Julia?
Absolutely. This is exactly the same thing, kind of what I would have said, Angelique and Joseph. I would even add to that that if it was relational well-being who brought up that discussion in your group, it has already proven useful in the way that I discussed it during my presentation. If relational well-being draws our attention to phenomena that we would otherwise have overlooked, that is an indicator for its usefulness in this broad sense, simply by, or exactly because it says, don't look at the individual in isolation. And Angelique has nicely elaborated on that already, so I'm not going to repeat to that. All I wanted to add is it is already one of those ways in which it can be useful.
Thank you. I see Candice and Charlene has put themselves off here. I don't know if they want to leave the difficult questions for me, but yeah, I wanted us to engage a little bit on this, this little bit of this pushback on the, this what was presented today, which was the theory testing and one of the core objectives of the work, as opposed to the more emancipatory work, which would center young people and say that, it's not about what the older people think must be tested and then, confirmed, but it will also, be taking that into account. So how do we balance those two?
Well, Angelique, maybe my group was room 8, and I think our report backer has a good answer for that.
Okay. Who's the report backer?
Lisa?
That happens to be me. And now, Charlene, you've given me a big fright here. I'm thinking, oh my gosh. So, yes, hi, everybody. We spent quite some time in our group sort of talking around who everybody is and what role they're playing and the different projects, which are all very, very interesting. And we spent some time discussing theory testing and the complexities around it. Some of the people in the group had done it as part of a PhD and we're just talking about it is a very complex thing to do. And I think that we heard that there is a written document Charlene mentioned, and people were very keen to go back and read that document and also listen or look at the presentation again. My sense was that people are coming to try and understand theory testing and everything that Julian was talking to us about. And people are starting to, and I am one of those people, starting to understand how our project would fit into this bigger picture in terms of theory testing around relational well-being. So I think the small group was useful for us to try and contextualize our smaller studies within the work that that you guys are all doing. And so I think most of the time was spent, we didn't really get to the monitoring and evaluation, did we, Charlene? We spoke about the community of practice and how useful that was going to be for people. People were very keen on being part of that. We also mentioned there's a tool for measuring relational well-being, which I think people want to go and have a look at. That's pretty much what I got out of our group. Thank you. Thanks, Charlene.
Thanks, Lisa. Lisa's being a little kind. Most of the people in our group were a little bit terrified about the idea of theory testing, Julian, because it's new and because for those of us in a qualitative paradigm, it is more difficult. And I think what I was trying to say to our group is we're all in the same boat. Theory testing isn't something that we all know loads about. And Julian, while people appreciated your input, there were also quite a few people in our group who were implementing partners. And for them, it kind of, went a little bit over their head. And so I was saying that the 4 to 6 pager that you did for us earlier on might be really useful to distribute. But I also wanted people to realize that it's one part of a very nice but very complicated program that we are putting out. And so we're going to learn together and we're going to hold each other's hands and we are going to find insights along the way. And so, yeah. Eileen and Julia. Sorry, Angelique.
Eileen?
Eileen, I think you're first.
Yes, I just wanted to take all the if there is some blame for the theory testing is on because I tell you all, I am, as a physicist, supposed to talk to my board about what we are going to do in this program if we want to test and validate this relational well-being approach that our board has endorsed, but what we try to implement in our program. But what I saw in my group is not so easy, and I see already that in the context, what does it mean to implement it, to use it? And we hit the spot in the discussion in my group. So I asked Julian to say, okay, what do you mean as social scientist by that? And I found this really excited to guide my thinking. So in our group, there was a discussion, but if there you find another way beyond that, two models, and it is credible for us, the reviewer, I will not be a reviewer, and the scientists of social science, and you can convince them there is another way beyond these two, which fit, and we can bring another theory in relation to this. That is great. Do it, and you don't need to be forced into these models, but it was more to activate our brains. And I found in our discussion that we are hitting the problem of the relational well-being, but at the end of the day, one of us said, the whole purpose of this is to align our thinking around relational and find a common language, because we all feel that it has something in it. So I think, yes, if across the project we find a common understanding about what is this relationality all about, and if it is Ubuntu, then we are going to do more Ubuntu. So yeah, so this is a little bit the summary, and that's where I want to stop.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Aline, thank you. I think, I mean, the idea is really not that, I mean, that Julian was presenting two different models. It's two approaches or two lenses to think through theory testing, and not for people to think that it's constrictive, you know. It was just to provide and sensitize them around what we mean when we're talking about theory testing and how it could be useful for us, as these are the two broad objectives of this program. So I just want people to not have a fright and try to develop other models. So thank you for that input, Aline. Julian?
Just two quick points. My first point is this very notion of, testing the usefulness of a theory, I think can build a bridge to various ways of, working with relational well-being. And that was really why I was keen to bring this in, because my impression is that too many people focus only on testing the correctness of theories when they discuss theory testing. And I really hope that many of you will find this very notion of testing the usefulness to be a very broad platform on which all kinds of thoughts, can rest and be accommodated with. And my second point is, I couldn't join the whole session yesterday. I had other commitments as well. I could just tune in, but I don't think that there's much of a contradiction between, let's say, action research or emancipatory goals and theory testing, because theories, in a way, are also a guidance if you want to enable people and if you want people to take care of their own lives. And to illustrate that, you could find that actually relational well-being is unnecessarily complex, and that it's enough to focus on one specific element in people's lives. I don't want to say that this is the case, but just to illustrate, and that you can improve the well-being of young people massively by focusing only on this particular element. I think my understanding of relational well-being so far is that it's a very holistic approach, which I think is great, but maybe in particular, if you want to do something for people, it can also, in a way, how should I say, overburden you with all of the things. People have to be connected, to have enough, and to feel good. And maybe just to illustrate that point, if you take out some classical Marxist work, you could say if only they had access to the means of production, their well-being would improve. I'm trying to point you at what it means to test theories, and while theories and theory testing does not mean that it contradicts other goals. When you have the goal to help people, you also have a theory of change in your mind, on your mind. And this is what you test here. Is it the best way to help people to think in this connected and relational way, or are there other ways? And then that will have a practical consequence, hopefully, for many people around the world.
Thank you, Julian. I think that's actually a great point to end the conversation around theory testing. Not to end the conversation, but to just close the conversation for today on theory testing. But I think that there's been a really great discussion and engagement around theory testing, which I think just sent everybody's minds buzzing. And I think that's exactly what we want. We really want to engage critically with you and learn with you around this. We've got a few more minutes, and I don't want us to forget the MESL component of this discussion. We know that Candice has shared with us the relational evaluation that we are trying to implement within YouGood. And so I wanted to know if there were any challenges that still remained after the discussion that you foresee in aligning your work with the MESL framework that we've shared with you. Are there any burning questions, one or two questions, or feedback from one or two of the groups? Can I have a hand? I see Vera is here. Vera, you have the floor.
Yes, Bongani guided us very, very good in our discussion, but I think we all agreed that, we had consensus that the MESL framework was quite clear. It was actually to help us to develop a common framework, a common language that we can, as scholars, communicate the new insights, the knowledge that we discover. And from my personal point of view, I found it very useful, very clear, crisp. Thank you.
Thank you. Feedback from one of the other rooms. Tuli?
Thank you. I think from our side, we're speaking, I think when you're speaking about the MESL, it's more specifically on the strategic learning. We thought that it's a two-way because we are so used to doing things. I remember Dr. Mloyi said that there's this theory of learning and unlearning and relearning again. So this is the moment where we go through it, and I'm glad that as the facilitators of this program, we are saying we're all learning, and that gives us an assurance that it means that it's no one that is coming to this knowing everything. So we all learning, and the learning is not only for us as researchers as well, it's also a learning that will happen in two ways, even for the young people as well. They will learn something, they will gain skills, because this is more like empowering them so that by the time when maybe this program ends, they will be able to carry on doing things on their own. But with us, we need to monitor what are they learning, what are they doing with their learning, so that they can feel that now they can start some other things on their own. Maybe there can be other projects that can be initiated by them as well after they've learned how to do research. And that is where the change will take place, and we will see that this had an impact on what they are doing. They will start to think on things for themselves as well. And that is the agency that we're aiming that our research will bring in, and the freedom that they will see that they can take initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tuli. I want to just, in closing, I want to actually ask Chelsea, who was in our group, to just give a last input, because we were cut off as we were being kicked out of the room. But she had a comment around the MESL, and I want to maybe just provide her an opportunity to bring that into the room. Chelsea? Maybe Chelsea has left.
She was struggling going in and out of the
Okay.
meeting. I think she has connection troubles.
Yeah, I think from the group there was just some concern around the extensiveness of the requirement for like monitoring and evaluation, and for us to be very clear around what sits with the program and what sits with the requirement for the project, because even in the application form, there is a template that needs to be completed. So they were requiring just a little bit of clarity around that, but also there was a concern around all of the requirements that for the submission of the full proposal, all of these different elements, and just the time. Although people felt that they are being supported through this process, so there was also very positive feedback around the way in which we are doing this program. So Candice, I don't know if you have some clarity just around that or nothing.
Yeah, I think we can maybe elaborate on that on a Q&A as we will develop that a little bit. Just yeah, what sits with the program and what sits with the researchers. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, but just bearing in mind, obviously, to feed that into our frequently asked questions, because this relates also. There's a very practical question around what should be populated in the template in the proposal. So we will engage directly with the groups that are still unclear about that. So colleagues, that brings us to 4 o'clock. It always seems like it's going to be too much time, and then all of a sudden the time is over. Thank you so much for your engagement on today. I think we are really now starting to actually get to know each other. I already know what kind of comments I'm going to start getting from different people. Yeah, we are very happy to meet with you again tomorrow on the Meaningful Collaboration with Young People session. But thank you so much for your engagement and your questions in today's session. We hope that you found it useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Very much.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you very
Only one
much,
query-
everyone, for
only
the
one query I have.
presentation. Wish you all the best and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
so much. All the
Thank you,
best.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah. Before leaving, I want to have one question, because tomorrow's program does not have a link. The link, because yesterday I was not joining the program, so I don't have the link.
Thank you, Prabhakar, for mentioning that. Yuliswa, can you just clarify? I think, Prabhakar, the communication actually should go. We should maybe just send out an email. I think there was some confusion. Yuliswa can confirm